Hopefully you had a good time to pray this afternoon and even probably go to confession for some of you. And hopefully you've been experiencing the Lord speaking to you in our meditations. Again, the theme is very simple. It's taken from the passage in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 8. And we are actually talking about the three different ideas. And the last idea, which we'll talk about tomorrow, is really a summary of the first two. We're asking ourselves, how do we follow the Lord? And we began by talking about the fact that the Lord describes it. It's about denying yourself. And then the second presentation this evening would then be, okay, another definition is take up your cross. And finally, the Lord says, if you do the first two, and then it just means you are following me. And that's the three ideas that we will be reflecting on. And this afternoon we began with this simple thought that, okay, come follow me means denying oneself. Right? And it's the first thought that we would like to at least understand. And I think many of you are overwhelmed that this denying myself means submitting my life to God and making Him the authority of my life. The absolute authority of my life. And if you look at Christian history, many individuals have taken on this mentality and said, okay, that's a good way to summarize who I am. St. Paul summarized his life simply by this. He's saying, from now on, it is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And you might still see, wow, this is an abstract idea. What does it mean to submit my whole life to God? What does it mean to offer my life to God and to follow His will? What is the will of God for me? Should I take this job or that job? I think the will of the Lord won't be that clear, but this next meditation is meant to at least describe some more to us. What does it really mean to submit our life totally to God? The second meditation is an invitation again to define what it means to follow Christ. To follow Christ means to take up His cross. And if you look at that statement, nowadays that sounds nice. Take up your cross. Or maybe not too nice because sometimes cross equals suffering, right? But it's very obvious that if you really think about its historical background, the cross is not a symbol of goodness. Its origin is not a symbol of goodness. Actually, the cross is a symbol of punishment. When a criminal is caught doing something wrong during the time of Jesus, it is obvious that one of the worst punishment that they could get from the Roman Empire is to be crucified. So it wasn't a symbol of goodness. It was actually a symbol of punishment. You could even say that it's this kind of punishment is a punishment given to people who did something wrong. Right? Now suddenly here comes Jesus Christ, who clearly, based on history, was crucified. And then, before He was crucified, He actually told His disciples, take up your cross. If you were a disciple and listening to Christ, you would have said to Him, time out. You don't take up your cross. The cross is put on you because that is a punishment. Right? I mean, why should we even say, okay, take up our cross? Why would we even want that? Are we masochists? We want to sort of inflict pain on ourselves or even declare to people that we are bad? Is that what it is? Well, the story would have ended there and the disciples would have been very confused if the story ended with Christ just offering His life on the cross and it ended there. But the story of Christianity is very clear. It did not end with the cross. It ended with Jesus Christ overcoming the cross. And He wanted to remind people, even as He was taking on the cross, He was trying to explain to them what He was doing. He was telling them, hey, let me tell you what I am about to do. I myself will take on this cross. I myself will take it on. He said this, if you look at Christianity, we are a religion that sometimes is equated to somebody who was crucified as a criminal. And maybe we might make the mistake of thinking Christianity is a religion that is based on someone who was caught doing something wrong. Right? Or it might be somebody who was oppressed. That he was a weakling who was taken on by a powerful empire. That's why let's identify with him. But it's also very clear the disciples heard Jesus explain something unusual. He said this to them as He was sort of preparing for His disciples to actually see Him suffer and be caught by this powerful empire. He told them, you might make the mistake of thinking that I was caught by these people. No. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down on my own accord. I am doing this because I want to. I'm offering my life, not because somebody wants to take it from me, but because I want to actually give it. That's why He even said this, greater love has no man than this, than a man lay down his life for his friends. Greater love has no man than this, than a man lay down his life for his friends. He said to His disciples, take it up. Take up this cross. Because I took it up. And you know why I took it up? I took it up not because I want to be punished. It is not about punishment. Because this truth, this invitation to take up the cross, is now this wonderful, transforming idea that we Christians proclaim to the world. This symbol of punishment and oppression has been transformed by the Christian religion into a symbol of profound love. Therefore, take up your cross becomes a different message. All the disciples, when they started recalling this invitation by the Lord to them, they began understanding, it's an invitation to imitate Christ in His way of loving. How much is He willing to love? How much is He willing to give? He is willing to give to the people that He loves, even if He loses everything. As long as the one He loves would get what he needs. Take up your cross now becomes a symbol of this profound truth that the Christian religion is centered on the idea of love. And the word love today is a word that all of us talk about. But sometimes we miss on this very important truth that love from the Christian perspective means agape. And agape means love that does the good always. Love that is willing to give to others always. That's why Jesus Christ was reminding His disciples, He was being asked, what is the summary of the will of God? How do we live our lives? Well, it's in the 10 Commandments. And Jesus reminds the Jews, how we not summarize it simply by this? Love God, do everything for God, do what's good in the eyes of God, and from there, you then make a choice to also do the good for others all the time. And it's an invitation to then live a life of love. Now let me make this a little bit clearer to you. Sometimes people say, is that really a good way to live? Especially in our world of selfie, right? In a world wherein self-actualization and finding yourself is very important. I remember talking to a group of young people about this, and they kept on insisting to me, wait a minute, Raoul, should we not first love ourselves before we love others? I mean, sometimes loving others, we might end up forgetting ourselves. Isn't it too much to love without thinking of yourself? Is it too much to love wherein you always think of the other? That's too much. Maybe that won't bring us happiness. One time, I had this interesting experience with my parents that made me realize that at some point in your life, you will reach a point where you love someone so much, you don't think too much about yourself anymore. Okay? And it's a beautiful thing. When I received an emergency call from my mother, and I received it and said, Raoul, we need help. Your dad and I are in the hospital. The two of you in the hospital, what happened? Well, we experienced food poisoning, we're really feeling bad, and we just rushed to the hospital, and your dad is feeling bad more than me. So when I arrived at the hospital, my parents were there, they did not want to stay in separate rooms. They wanted to be together. That's how sweet they are. But we could not find a room that would have the two of them, so they settled for rooms that are adjacent to each other. That was the compromise. My mom said, no way, I won't take my husband. They only agreed when the nurse said, Mom, the only one available is the one beside. Okay, that's good enough. So I ended up going to this hospital, and the two rooms were just right in front of each other, and I went to my mother first. So mother needs you more because my father is a guy. So I went to my mother. I said, Mom, so how are you? And then when I looked at her, my mom is very concerned about the way she looks. She's not that kind of woman. Every time she always wears makeup, even in the house. And sometimes there was a point that she would even give tips to the sisters who would visit members of the community on how to be beautiful. That's my mom. So anyway, when I entered her room, I noticed that she wasn't wearing her dentures. And I said, "Wow, that's weird." Of course, she's sick, but and I said, "Ma, what happened?" And she was speaking. She really looked bad without her dentures. So I did not mention anything to her because that would drive her crazy. So I said, "So what happened?" Finally, I was full. I could not stop myself. "Ma, where are your dentures?" It's a long story. Because after the party, your dad and I arrived at the house and we started, getting very, very sick. Your dad was worse. But I was panicking, and I don't know what happened. But I lost my dentures in the house. But then I saw your dad. He was really in bad shape. And you know that we don't have a car. So what I did is, imagine, I went around the neighborhood without my dentures. Convincing our neighbor that we need help. And I said, "You did that, Ma?" "Yes." And I even carried your dad to the car. And finally we reached the hospital. So I said, "Wow, that was a loving thing to do. That is very inspiring." So at some point, I went to my dad's side. Now this is the funny part. When I went to my dad's side, he really looked bad. course, he was probably vomiting and doing other stuff. So he was dirty. He was dirty. And he was moaning the whole time. And then he goes, "Son, can you bring me my extra underwear?" So I said, "I need to change." So I went to look at his bag. There was no underwear. So I said to myself, what will I do? My dad seems to be very in need. I did the crazy thing. I remembered my mom without dentures. So I went to the bathroom. You could stop imagining what happened, but I got an underwear. And then I gave it, folded it nicely, and gave it to my dad. And then my dad wore it, and he was fine. After probably several weeks, I visited them. They were already fine by that time, and we were telling stories. And then, my mom just was smiling at me, and she said, "Hey, let me tell you something." So I go, "What's that?" Your dad was very touched. Well, your dad was very touched because he realized that you have matured already to the point that you are willing to sacrifice your underwear for him. And, he was really moved. He was actually crying a little bit when he was telling me the story of what happened. She said, your dad was conscious about what you did when you were doing it. And for one reason or another, he never forgot it. Fast forward. Around probably 10 years after this event, my father was suffering already from cancer at this time. And my mother was suffering from Parkinson's disease. And I think some of you heard this story before. And I remember another story when she told me, one of the clear things that I realized that made me open my eyes to the fact that your dad really loves me was this incident. What happened, Ma? Well, one morning, your dad was not visiting me anymore, but I didn't know why. But then suddenly that morning, I said to myself, well, I will just stand up on my own and use my toilet, which is a major activity for my mother. And the toilet is just right beside the bed, right beside the bed. That's a major activity for her, together with my dad. But she said, my husband is not well, maybe he doesn't care for me anymore, that's why he doesn't visit me anymore, so I will do this on my own. So she started standing up on her own. As she was standing up, my dad suddenly entered the room. And then my mom noticed that my father lost a lot of weight. Because of course that was the cancer affecting him already. And immediately my dad, when he saw that my mom was trying to stand up, he approached and they started helping each other. As they were helping each other, sabi ko, "Ma'am, so what happened?" Well, we never succeeded. We ended up falling down the bed. And the two of us were lying down, and then your dad said this to me. He said, please ask the caregiver to take care of you. Because I realized, you know what? I don't even have the strength to carry you anymore. But then my mom said, I realized your dad did not think anymore whether he could do it or not. His thought was, how can I help my wife? Now, I think you get the point. We live in a world that's so preoccupied with finding what it means to actualize oneself, to find meaning in who we are. But the Christian message is radical and different from the world's message. Jesus Christ tells us, take up the cross. Take it up. choose the path of love. Choose the path where you would say to yourself, I might lose myself in the process, but this is done for the good of others or for the good of another. And let me do it. Jesus Christ created a revolution. The symbol of punishment became a symbol of love because a man was willing to take it on because he wanted to communicate to his disciples, greater love has no man than this, than a man lay down his life for his friends. This story that I experienced with my family reminds me all the time, Raoul, when you're thinking too much about yourself, you won't be happy. The more you think of what you can do for others, that's the time you will be happy. What happens to us when we choose a path of love? What will our experience be? Take up the cross is not easy. The first thing that you will see is this. Oh no! Loving people and living a life of love is very costly. It's not easy. Sometimes, and many times, you'll be even tempted to give up and go back to the old way of just thinking of ourselves. But the invitation is, do not stop. Keep on taking it up. Because in the end, if you take it up, you will then realize that you can only do this if God helps you. You can only do this kind of good if you consistently ask God, this is not easy. Please help me. I want to be a loving person. And in the end, if you realize that it will require God, you would also realize this effort of choosing a life of love, of taking up the cross, is not an exam. What's the meaning of this? Maybe because I'm in the academy, I always teach my students and, pass, fail, and people are worried whether they will fail in my course. Although my course is so easy, only one person has failed in my course, and he is condemned by the whole Ateneo, I think, but I don't mention his name to people. But what's an exam? An exam is a measure of your capability, right? If you end up applying for a job which probably you've forgotten already, for some of you, people look at your resume, your success and failures, right? And then you're measured by your amount of success, and your failure affects the way people look at you, right? But it's an amazing thing. When you're trying to pursue a life of love, you will not be measured like you took an exam. Because it's very possible that when you're face to face with God, and you tell God, God, here's my report card regarding love. I tried to love the way you love, and I failed. And I tried again, then I failed. I tried again, and I failed. God, look at that. So many failures. It's possible for God to actually look at me and tell me, you know what, Raoul? I think you have become a very, very loving person. And I said, why? Look, you tried again and again and again and again. And each try, each moment you took the cross up, you have become more and more and more like me. Oh, this is not an exam. Well, this works differently. When we choose to live a life of love, what we're being asked is to choose a path that transforms us for who we are. And we are transformed not by the times we fail, but even we are transformed by the times we try again. It's the only, I think, one of the rare things that we have in life, that in a sense, it's okay to fail many times as long as you keep on trying. Right? And the beautiful conclusion here is this. The invitation of God is very clear. If you want to be my disciple, take up your cross. Take this up. Choose to put it on yourself. Some people always think cross is equals to suffering. It's possible for you to suffer because you did something bad, right? Here, what Jesus is saying is this. What you're taking up is an act of love. And that kind of thing sometimes requires suffering. But in the end, it will become always the path to what will give you meaning in life. And let us do at least, if we have still time, I don't know if we do, but maybe at least 10-15 minutes. Maybe to pause for a few minutes of reflection. Maybe you could also continue tomorrow morning. But to think about this, spend a few moments like that. Okay, so you will explain. So when the exercise is being given to us by Abyo, I'd like us to also use this reflection as a way of helping us understand what it means to offer our lives to the Lord by taking up the cross. So give the mic back to Abyo.